Good morning. The greatest threat to the future of the Jewish people is the success of the state of Israel. For 2,000 years, Israel was a concept. It was a beautiful idea that allowed the Jewish people to share a sense of longing and belonging. We called ourselves the people of the book because we were in many ways a literary idea. We stood together atop Mount Nebo like Moses before his death. We looked at the land and couldn't enter it. This is what the Bible says about this site. ארץ חיטה ושעורה וגפן ותאנה ורימון. ארץ זית שמן ודבש, ארץ אשר לא במסכנות תאכל בה לחם, לא תחסר כל בה. ארץ אשר אבניה ברזל ומהרריה תחצוב נחושת. ספר דברים. A land of wheat and barley, and vines and fig trees and pomegranates. A land of olive trees and honey. A land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou may dig brass. This description appears in the book of Deuteronomy, but if it sounds familiar to you, it's because you saw it not long ago. It is this film that El Al is screening before landing with the Hava Nagila in the background. But then you land in Israel, in the real Israel. In contrast to Moses, our modern fathers, Herzl and Ben-Gurion and Begin, didn't want an ideal state here. They wanted a state in the most realistic sense, a modern, successful, strong, and democratic state. They believed we had sufficient strength to take upon us the responsibilities of a real nation, the social divisions, the need to build and maintain strategic alliances, the need to build an army that will be stronger and better trained than all our enemies. The understanding that democracy is a state of managed conflict that is not meant to be solved, but to keep a balance of basic rules which everyone has to follow. They succeeded. We succeeded. Israel in 2017 is everything but a concept. It is a place where I'm raising my children. I don't do it for historical reasons, even though history runs through our lives here, but because I can't think of a better place to raise children. They will grow up in a country which is a unique combination of the startup nation and the land of Isaiah and Jeremiah, one of the world's leading countries in culture and science, military superpower, a thriving economy, and a place where even the kosher restaurants are excellent. Above all, our children live in a country where they have the privilege, and I can't think of a bigger privilege, not only to be part of the story, but also to write the story. They are significant. Their lives have a meaning, and they are creating the world in which they live. I can't think of a greater gift the country can give to its young citizens. We obviously have problems as well. Peace remains an unattained wish, mostly because of the ongoing refusal of the Palestinians. The social divisions are way too deep. We have a political system that is way too busy with itself and causes more harm than good. But these problems do not represent an anomaly. They represent the opposite. They represent the price of normality. That's the country we have built. That's the country We are still building. Israel is a miracle which amazes me every morning, but this miracle isn't taking place in a perfect world. In a perfect world, you don't need miracles. We have real problems faced by real people who live in the real world. But without anyone intending it, modern Israel, because of the harsh of reality, of building and the daily management of it, has placed before the Jewish people a challenge we are struggling to cope with. A shared dream is a strong thing. It allows us to ignore or overlook the differences between us. It creates a sense of purpose. Reality, on the other hand, is not shared. Between life in Jerusalem and in life in San Francisco or in Kiev, there are significant visible and at times grating differences. The defining quality of modern Israel is the tension between the need to survive and the need to be moral. For us, these aren't theoretical questions. When a young officer is standing in Gaza opposite a kindergarten from which he's being shot at, he needs to make a split-second decision. He will decide between the need to defend his soldiers and survive, and his need to remain a moral person in a moral Jewish army, which is, and this isn't a cliche, the most moral army in the world. The real Israel, like any other country, is a constant navigation between such dilemmas, between competing interests and limited resources. You build a road in the north, then you probably don't build one in the south. You cut import tariffs to bring down the cost of living, then people might lose their jobs. You want every Jew to be able to pray at the Western Wall according to their tradition, which looks like a trivial goal, and it creates a crisis with the ultra-Orthodox parties. The job, by the way, is to solve this dilemma, not to ignore it. If I'm elected prime minister, I will pass the Western Wall framework and implement it within the first month in office. This tension between moral decisions, day-to-day politics, and the need to survive always leads to imperfect results. It certainly won't be as perfect as we told ourselves it would be before we had a country. It certainly won't be as perfect as the Jewish people have been trying to be for 2,000 years. I think that's fine, as long as we keep on trying. On the other hand, this imperfection presents a challenge for the Jewish people in the diaspora. How judgmental can they be? Do they stand behind us even when we're wrong? Or do they have the right or even the responsibility to hold the mirror up to us? Are the Jewish people a chorus of cheerleaders for the Israeli team or a full part of the team on the field with us? What happens when a different type of Judaism develops in Israel to the one in the diaspora? A Judaism which isn't just historical or universal, but also geographical and connected to a place. A Judaism which doesn't exist only in the synagogue or in the community, but also in the army, in the economy, in the judicial system. A Judaism which is often disconnected entirely from the central experience of the diaspora, life with non-Jews. There is no definitive answer to all these questions. There can't be. But we can't allow ourselves not to engage in a dialogue about them. not to have a discourse. In order to have this discourse, we need to do away with a few underlying principles. The state of Israel cannot afford to assume that it is immune from criticism from within the Jewish world, and especially the American Jewish communities. We have to face the fact that we are at risk of losing a whole generation of young liberals in the United States and in Europe. In the US specifically, we are at the risk of losing our base of support in the Democratic Party and our bipartisan standing. The state of Israel cannot ignore another problem which affects the next generation. The fact that young Israelis know almost nothing about the word Jewry. Not about their culture or communal life, not the complicated struggles with identity. When the Israeli Minister of Religious Services stands on the Knesset podium and says that Reform and conservative Jews aren't really Jews, most Israelis sees it as nothing more than an oddity. Word Jewry sees it in a completely different way. Let me make this clear here and now. There are no first-rate Jews and second-rate Jews. All streams of Judaism needs to be recognized by the state of Israel. The Jewish people are in a desperate need of a different dialogue to the one we have today. At times it seems like the only unifying force of the Jewish people in these times is our shared fear and rage from the revival of anti-Semitism. There we unite. When graves are desecrated in St. Louis, Missouri, it happens to me. When 2 young Jews are attacked in Paris, it happens to me. When the chief rabbi of the Universities of Scotland is attacked in front of his young children in Edinburgh Center, it happens to me. And when a 13-year-old girl is murdered in her bed in Kiryat Arba just because she's Jewish, I know it happens to you. The days in which the Jewish people hid from anti-Semitism are over. We will face it together. From here, from Jerusalem, we say, enough. Jews won't hide anymore. Jews won't be scared anymore. And we expect the governments of the world to fight anti-Semitism with all their might. Jewish blood will not be cheap anymore. And yet, anti-Semitism cannot define the relationship between us. What defines us is not our enemies, but our bond as a family. And as a family, we need an open dialogue, brave and incisive one. It is the role of Israel to lead this dialogue. The role of Israel's leadership is not to solve momentarily political problems, but to ask, where will we be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? The role of leadership is to lay the emotional, ideological, and intellectual foundation for our children to use in order to remain a family. My wife tends to laugh at the fact that the first thing I do when I'm abroad and I enter a room is to look for the Jews. She calls it my Jew detector. I tell her that this is the most natural thing to do in a foreign environment. You look for the people you can trust. We need to engage in a dialogue which will allow that trust to continue through the next generations. That's not happening today. Our role, the role of this room, is to start leading it. Thank you very much.